I want to say I have my amazing wife, Autumn, with us today. I believe there's a couple of classes, at least two classes. I know Dr. Stebbins' International Studies class is here. Appreciate you coming. Where are you guys? Okay. And my serial murders class is also here. This is for them because I selected this particular case because we're starting on team serial killers this week. And these are the most notable team serial killers in Ireland. So worked out really, really well. Okay. Good?
Yep, I'm just
Okay.
getting people to scan in.
Okay.
So you speak, and if you haven't scanned, I'll have those for you.
Okay. So how many, I imagine all of you have heard of Theodore Robert Bundy, right? Raise your hand if you've heard about this person, this monster, right? For me, that was my first memory of a serial killer, other than Jack the Ripper, right? I grew up with Jack the Ripper being from London originally, but that was my first memory. But as far as young teenager, that was my first memory was Ted Bundy. The thing that stuck out about Ted Bundy was his 68 tan Volkswagen that he used to aid in his murders. He would drive around in his Volkswagen and stalk his prey, right? And he would fake an injury. He would either have a cast on his arm, a sling on his arm, or on crutches in order to lure women into his vehicle. He even took his front seat out of the passenger side and laid them down in the passenger side of his Volkswagen. But he would lure them, hey, can you help me carry my books, whatever the case may be, and then it was too late. That particular case, how many remember that case? Are you old enough to remember that? Okay, but you're familiar with Ted Bundy, though, over time. Most of you have seen documentaries and movies and stuff. Okay. The case that we're going to look at today, very similar to Ted Bundy, even though it's a team of serial killers, but very alike as far as behavioral background and behavioral pattern, with one big difference that we'll go over here in a little bit. Okay. So just like Ted Bundy, the Murphys, the title of this presentation, they would use their vehicles, whatever the vehicle they had stolen or borrowed or whatever, to pretty much do the same thing. They would maneuver to find their prey, and then they would lure their prey in, and then, of course, it would be too late. That was their method of operation. They did it every time. They did it even when there was no murder. They were serial rapists. So it was something that they did routinely as far as committing crimes. Okay. All right. Since Ted Bundy, I imagine you guys have heard a lot about serial murders throughout the last 3 or 4 decades. The interest in fascination with serial killers has grown exponentially over the years, over the decades, so much that we tend to remember their names and pseudonyms or monikers, and their heinous acts that show their depravity, right? Regularly though, we sometimes forget the victims and the victims' family. I don't think any of you, other than those in my serial murders class, know the victims of serial murders. It's just not something we look at. We look at the serial killers, which is sad, but it's part of our culture since probably the early 60s, where the concept of serial murders really grew from. Okay, so we're going to look at the Murphys. This is a pseudonym. This is an alias. This is an assumed name that the two killers that we're going to talk about this morning took on as part of their aliases. They had several. We're going to talk about a few throughout this morning, but I want to give you kind of a preliminary look at what we're going to talk about as far as team serial killers. All right, let's look at serial murder in the Republic of Ireland. Serial murder is extremely rare in Ireland. In fact, it's so rare that many people believe that this case was the first and last case of serial murder in the country, which is hard to believe. Of course, I don't believe that. There's too many missing persons in Ireland and any place in the world to say that there wasn't a serial killer at any point. But this is known, okay? Most people in Ireland and around the world looking at Ireland believe this case of team serial killers was the first case and last. There hasn't been one since of serial murder in Ireland, okay? When we're looking at Ireland, we're going to focus primarily on the Republic of Ireland, not Northern Ireland, which makes up the whole of Ireland. So I included Google Maps on here. So throughout, I want this to be a little interactive. So if you have questions about locations, we'll switch to Google Maps, and I will direct you to where we're looking at specific. I have one slide that has a map, but it's kind of a general slide. I'm going to point out the main dates and locations. But the Google map gives a good look at how Ireland looks, how people travel through, get across country, and where the major cities are, that type of thing. Okay? All right. Murder-homicide rate. The murder-homicide rate in the 31-year period that I looked at, on average, was 1.07 per 100,000 population. So what that amounts to average is 46 murders per year in Ireland over that time span. Okay, not a lot of murders. Most states have more murders than that. Most cities have more murders. Major cities have more murders than that. So the whole country averages, based on that murder-homicide rate, 46-ish murders a year. Okay, not very many, and most of those are situations where, again, this is known murders, situations where it wasn't really a serial killer or it really wasn't a murder situation that you think of. It's more of a domestic situation or crimes like that. Robberies gone wrong. So they're not what you're thinking as far as serial killers it goes, okay? All right, so let's apply some figures to give you an idea of how prevalent serial murder is and apply those figures to Ireland as we see them in the United States, okay? In 2008, the FBI guessed that in America, at any given time, less than 1% of all murders, there's thousands of murders in the United States, less than 1% comprise serial murders, okay? For the United States, that's a lot of serial murders if we look at the total population, okay? If I apply that same less than 1%, I apply just 1% to the murder rate in Ireland, I come up with 0.48 of a serial murder. 0.48 serial murders using that high estimate that we use in the US of serial murders that are occurring at any given time in Ireland. So half of murder involves a serial murder, which is a high estimate using the FBI's estimate for the United States. So what is it in real life as far as known serial killers? I mean, it's so low that it just doesn't occur on a regular basis, yearly basis, okay? All right, so then we take a look at the most comprehensive study of serial killers in the United States and look at how many serial killers are teams here, part of a group, and then apply it to Ireland, okay? So looking at American serial killers from 1850 to 2004, 26% of all the serial murders involved a team. 26%, okay? A lot, but not very many as far as what you think. But it depends on how you perceive, right? But in that study, 26% of all serial killers were part of a team, whether it been husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, lovers, whatever family members, they comprise that percentage. Then in the 2014 update, 2004 to 14, 22% of American serial killers comprised all serial murders. So the figure went down. Why are we looking at a 10-year period? Well, we have more serial killers since the 1970s. 2004 back to 1850, there weren't as many, okay? But what does that figure? If we apply those average of 25% of all serial killers are part of a team. In other words, we do it together, right? 0.12, again, this is a high estimate. This applies to the United States. We apply it to the figures of Ireland. 0.12 of all serial murders, in this case is essentially none, it comprises a team serial killer, okay? So it gives you a good idea. This is shocking. When this type of thing happens, a series of murders occurs in a country that doesn't have a lot of violence. The culture says no violence. When we have something like this occur, people go missing and then they're found dead, and we can connect them to a series of murders committed by 2 or more people. It shocked the community, right? This is not only the community, the police. The police were very shocked by this as well. So that gives you an idea of serial murder in Ireland. It's nothing like, it's one of the lowest as far as rates, murder rates in the entire world, especially among developed modern countries, okay? Elizabeth Plunkett, Mary Duffy, both 23 years old, both from Ireland. They were brutally beaten, they were brutally tortured, repeatedly beaten, repeatedly raped, and eventually strangulated by the Murphys, okay? Over a period of hours, almost days in one case, okay? They repeatedly beat and strangled their victims, Mary Duffy and Elizabeth Plunkett. They're both from Ireland, obviously. Mary Duffy is from rural Ireland. Again, the culture there, family is everything. We have her living with her 6 other siblings and her elderly parents, 2 jobs, want to support the family. And her ambition is to make more money and go to the US and make more money and further support her family back in Ireland. So that was her. She loved to dance. She was well-liked, loved by everybody. Same thing with Elizabeth Plunkett. She lived in more urban area in Dublin, the capital. Her parents lived close by. She worked as a county clerk in a printing office, and she had a large family, a lot of siblings, and of course her parents lived close by. So these victims, these people, of course, no one deserves to go through what I just explained they went through. And I'll go in a little more detail as far as the time lapse. I'm only going to mention important details that led to their arrest. Okay, if I said everything, it would take hours to talk to you guys. But I'm going to make sure you get the evidence, the information that specifically led to the arrest. Okay. So these were the victims of our serial killers that we yet to see their names yet. Okay, here they come. Here come the monsters. John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans. These 2, they were the tragic, Mary and Elizabeth were the tragic victims of John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans. They were serial rapists. They were opportunistic serial rapists, and what we refer to in the field as sex murderers. They made a pact while in prison together in England that they would kill and rape and kill 1 woman a week. Okay, they made this pact in prison. Okay, they were drifters. They were in and out of jail from teenage years all the way up to now, of course, at this point in history. Jeffrey Evans was smaller in stature, a very small guy, but very high as far as intelligence compared to the other one, John Shaw. But still probably below average because they'd made a lot of mistakes in their campaign. So smaller in stature, John Shaw was bigger, more bulkier, more strong, but yet Jeffrey Evans assumed the leadership role. He was the psychological leader or had psychological control over John Shaw. So whatever he said happened, okay? No matter what John Shaw believed, Jeffrey Evans said it, he did it, okay? And in the study that I mentioned previously of American serial killers, Eric Hickey, who was the researcher in that, said without exception, every group of offenders had one person who psychologically maintained control of the other members of the team. Without exception, there was one person, even if it was 5 people involved, okay? All right, to illustrate this case, to discuss with you the events, basically the behavioral background of these 2 individuals and their pattern of behavior, I'm going to use Ronald Holmes and James DeBurger's 1988 4-type typology of serial murders. Okay, specifically, I'm going to focus on power control oriented types. Because we know a lot about this case information, the people, their confessions, we can neatly place them into this particular typology. These typologies are used by law enforcement to give direction as far as further investigation purposes. Okay, so as far as behavioral background, your typical serial killer, especially in Holmes and DeBurger's study, the typical serial murderer had the core components of behavior: psychological, internal, expressive psychological gain from whatever their events or whatever their behavior was. So that was typical of all serial murders, okay? But we're going to focus on the other 3 factors, which are victims, okay? Crime scene, like location, and their methods. Those are the 3 factors that we're going to look at throughout the presentation for the remainder of the presentation, okay? So real quick, let's talk about victims in this particular case and as far as this particular typology. Victims are specific, okay? In this case, their victims, the one they prey on, they look for, are small, young females, a vulnerable population, right? They want to find young, small females. 2 men can overpower most young, small, I don't care how athletic or how strong they are, 2 men can take care of the situation, usually, okay? Non-random. Okay, typically in this particular typology, serial killers are random in their selection of victims, but this is more about the lack of randomness being the location itself. The murder, they look for specific locations that fit their methods, that they were able to get away with their crimes, okay? It wasn't necessarily the randomness of the person, because they know who to look for, right? And it was random who they found. They say, oh, you, that's a good one. Okay, so it's random in that respect, but the actual locations are not as random, okay? Meaning non-random in this particular case. And they're strangers. In all these cases, in this case particularly, in all this power control oriented typology, all of them are strangers. They don't know who they are until they meet them, and they probably don't know their name anyway, because they're going to do things to them where they don't care. They don't care about people. They care about the power, the control that they get over people, okay? Methods, process focus. What that means is they care more about how they get to the point of killing somebody versus the actual kill being what gratifies them, okay? And that's what really separates Bundy from these 2 individuals. Bundy took gratification from killing young women, where Murphys, they didn't want to kill, they wanted to kill because they were going to get caught if they don't, okay? And when they were in England and they were brought up on charges, or they're wanted for raping young women, they would be identified eventually, right? If they didn't kill them. And that's the case we'll talk about as far as time frame here in a little bit. Planned. Even though they were opportunistic and they were spontaneous in their behaviors, they planned well. They They scoped the area as far as where they're going to take the person to commit the murder, the rapes. They knew where they were going. They knew how they're going to do it and what it took to get away with it. Okay, so it was well planned and they were organized. Okay, murder locations are dispersed geographically transient, which basically means if they live in an area or they stay in an area, they do crimes and they move to another area to commit more crimes. Okay, basically they move around the country in this case. Okay, if it wasn't for their convictions of Mary Duffy and Elizabeth Plunkett, they were going to kill more people. They got caught, and the individuals, the potential victims, were smart. In particular cases, they left. They didn't accept a ride or whatever the case may be. So it would occur more often because their plan was to kill one a week. Doesn't mean they're going to. It might be two every 2 days. They were constantly looking for young women to rape and kill. Okay. Okay, so you can kind of see their history between the two, like 62 convictions. Most of these were larceny, stealing, robbery. So that's what they were known for. As far as if they saw an opportunity to rob you or steal your stuff or break into your house, they were looking for those opportunities, along with trying to find young females to rape and kill. That was their pact. Okay. John Shaw was more of the sexual deviant. He actually had a conviction for attempted rape prior to all this taking place and indecency with a young boy. So he was a known sexual deviant. So he had that as far as history that made them talk about this, think about this while in prison. Sick minds to get together and talk about this stuff. Jeffrey Evans, 36 convictions, mostly robbery. He did steal a car as far as convictions goes. So there's a lot of crime they probably got away with as well. So they are hardened criminals. Remember, drifters, they're constantly moving, getting cars, moving around the country. That was their method of operation. Okay. I will tell you, if they're, again, interactive, if you have any questions at any point, I do have the map of Ireland up here. So raise your hand if you want to have a question about locations. I'm gonna go over a map here in a second, but I can go to this real quick and tell you specifically where things occurred. Again, we don't have enough time for everything that they did. Okay, here's the map of Ireland. The pins with the white dots are the locations of the murders and the locations where their bodies were found. Okay. And this occurred over a period of a year, a month. But we're going to go a little further back as far as timeline to see how they came about coming to Ireland. Okay. All right. Late 1974, they were released from prison. They were both in prison together in Liverpool. They were released about the same time, and they had pending charges, or they were wanted by the police for 3 rapes that occurred, and they were the prime suspects. To avoid being arrested and prosecuted, they decided, let's get on a ferry and go to Ireland. Okay, they assumed the names of, remember our names of our 2 individuals, Jeffrey Evans and John Shaw. Okay, Jeffrey assumed the name of Jeffrey Murphey. Okay, and John Shaw assumed the name of John Murphy. So they got on a ferry with assumed names, trying to protect their identity because they were wanted by the British police. Okay, smart in that respect. Okay, they were able to take the ferry to Dublin from Liverpool. They arrived shortly, late 1974, and right away, what do you think they did? They tried to start their pact that they made, And they began by trying to make money by breaking into houses and caravans, trailers. Irish call them the caravans. So they try to make money, and they go along the coast of Ireland, robbing, burglarizing caravans, homes, bars, whatever they can find, opportunistic, to make some money to support building their pact so they can maybe more able to do that. Okay. So this went on. They got to Ireland, Dublin, and how do you think they got around? They thumbed rides back in the 70s. Some of you, if you hitchhike, it was probably pretty safe for the most part to hitchhike. Same thing in Ireland. It was not uncommon for women even to hitchhike, or what they call a summer ride. So, excuse me. So that's what they did, and for several weeks, up and down the coast of the east coast of Ireland, okay, they would break into houses, break into whatever, opportunistic, trying to fund their journey. Okay, they tracked around the country. But with any hardened criminals, they're going to eventually get caught, and that's what happened. They did get caught for burglary and all these. They determined they were responsible for several burglaries. Okay. All right. So in February 5th, 1975, they were found guilty. They were charged with 16 counts of burglary occurring over that several weeks. They were charged with and convicted of 1 count of burglary for each, and the judge gave them 2 years in prison. Okay, for all those burglaries. The judge would send them to Cork Prison, where they shortly stayed, and transferred to Mountjoy Prison. Okay. They would serve about 18 months of that 2-year sentence, and one served 3 weeks more. Evans served 3 weeks more, but than Shaw did. They still had their pact. That's a long time. Again, more talking about what they're going to do, but at least the community was safe at this point. While in prison, they met a guy named Cliff Altram, fellow Englishman. Okay, this makes it more interesting, this case, because in the beginning I said these are the most notable serial killers in Ireland. They're English, so they weren't even Irish. So we not only don't have any serial killings going on in Ireland, but they're not Irish. Okay, so they're actually British, technically British serial killers that happen to do their crimes in Ireland. Okay, so Cliff Altram would leave prison prior to Evans and Shaw. Cliff Altram lived in Feathered, Tipperary, in Ireland, and some of you have been there. They name their place and then the county. I live in Feathered, County Tipperary. That's how they describe where they live, where they work. So Feathered, County Tipperary, in the south part of Ireland. So Cliff said, when you guys are out, you guys can come and stay with me. And that's exactly what happened. When Shaw got out February 5th, 1975, he went, or excuse me, August 5th, exactly 18 months later, he went to stay with Altram, right? Okay, and told Evans, once you get out, come on down as well to Feathered and join us. Okay, so that's what happened. Evans got out, got on the train. Before getting on the train, he'd put his suitcase, all his stuff, in a left luggage locker in the train station in Euston in Dublin, and then proceeded to take a train to Feathered. 3 weeks later, Evans would get out, and he would thumb a ride. He didn't have the money, and he left his suitcases there because they planned on going back to get those suitcases. Just extra clothing, all that stuff. So, okay, that's kind of where we're at. So 26th August, that's when Evans got out of prison. All right, so they both ended up in Feathered with Cliff Altram. Cliff Altram had a friend named Frank Walsh, that agreed to lend Evans and Shaw, their vehicle. It was an Austin A40, kind of like this right here. Okay? So they went to get this car from Frank Walsh, Cliff Altram, and Evans and Shaw. Got this car, brought it back. They immediately proceeded to Dublin to get Evans's luggage from the train station. Okay, I don't know why he left it there and just didn't take it with him. Maybe because he didn't have a ride. But they went back on August 28th, 1976. Okay, they drove to Dublin to get those suitcases. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Plunkett and a bunch of her friends decided to go on vacation to British Bay on the coast of Ireland. It's a vacation hotspot, bars, caravans, cheap accommodations. They decided to go to British Bay for vacation. Included in this group was Damien Bush, her boyfriend, Mela Bush, Damien's sister, and Elizabeth's best friend, and then a couple other people that joined them. Okay, they drove, and it's probably the same drive as Springfield from here. Okay, just over an hour drive, 50 miles. So the friends drove in 2 cars, and they headed to British Bay. They arranged a caravan they can stay for the weekend. Okay, everything's good. Meanwhile, Evans and Shaw get the luggage come from Dublin. They decide to head towards the same county that where they're going to do some more robberies. But also, they always had in their mind of what? To rape and kill a woman. That they were always looking for those things. So they would stop and do some break-ins along the way. And then when they got to the area, they actually stopped and tried to pick up somebody, a young woman, but she said she was waiting for somebody. And they didn't want to mess with that as far as having to deal with 2 people instead of 1 to fight with. So they tried to do that, and here's their maneuver that's kind of like Ted Bundy. They would drive together. Evans always drove. Okay? Shaw was in the passenger. He did whatever Evans told him. They would drive along and let Shaw out when they saw somebody they wanted to pick up to look less intimidating. So they'd go further. They saw somebody further and tried to, hey, where are you going? Do you need a lift? Blah, blah, blah. And if they said, yeah, and then they would get in, and then he would pick up Shaw, put him in the back seat, and they would continue on, and then the attack occurred. The abduction, and then subsequent beatings and rapes. Okay, that was their method, similar to Bundy, but different than Bundy, burying his victims. They would dump their victims in a body of water, because Ireland has a lot of lakes, what they call lochs, and of course the Irish Sea on one side, the Atlantic Ocean on the other. So, okay, so that was their plan. We have the potential victim making their way to British Bay to have a good time. All right, group of 6, including Elizabeth, they went to, they got their caravan situation taken care of. They went to McDaniel's Pub and Restaurant. This is a big place, holds like 800 people. So there's a lot of people. This is a Saturday night, so they blend in. Evans and Shaw, who were with the assumed names Murphys, right? They ended up in British Bay and ended up in McDaniel's, and they saw an argument that Elizabeth was having with her boyfriend. Okay, so they saw that as an opportunity. She got mad and she actually left. And guess what happened? They followed. They got in their car and they did their little maneuver. Okay. This was at night. They passed her. Saw, yeah, that would work. Okay, young, small in stature. They called them females birds, and I want a little bird. That was Evans. Okay, so they go up the road. John would get out. Evans would come back and say, hey, do you need a ride? Where are you going? She'd say Dublin. That's where she lived. So she gets in the car. He returns back to where Shaw was, a close distance, and picks up Shaw. And now she's feeling kind of weary about this whole situation because he didn't look too bad. He's small in stature, Evans. And then Shaw gets in, a bigger, burlier guy gets in, and she didn't feel good. Even though she was athletic, strong, it's just hard to as far as your mind to deal with a situation like. She knew she might be in trouble. So they immediately drove her to a wood close by, the Castle Timon Woods, where they immediately started beating her. They tied her hands behind her back and took her into the woods. Okay, and they took turns raping her. They would leave on occasion to do different things. One time they left to move the car to a less inconspicuous place, like a bar parking lot. Okay, and then they'd go back. And then after several hours, they'd go back to get the car and return. Okay, so they raped, tortured, beat her over and over and over. And then John Shaw came to the time of killing her. He said, "What do we do with her?" And Evans says, "Kill her," like we talked about. And he's like hesitant, and Evans would say this to him: "Remember what happened in England." What happened in England? They had witnesses, right, to their crimes, and they were going to go to prison if they were caught. They didn't want that to happen. This is what we call a sex murderer. They kill to protect themselves from being caught, okay, survive the situation and not get caught. That's the reason why they kill. This is the case with Evans and Shaw, okay? With Bundy, it's all about killing, eventually, okay? So told John to remember what happened in England. And so, doing what he was told, because he was under control, persuaded, he took a shirt out of Evans' suitcase and he tied it around her and strangulated Elizabeth. So this was over a period of hours. They were talking about how to get rid of the body. They decided, since they were close to the Irish Sea, that they would dump her body in the Irish Sea. So they found a lawnmower. They actually left her in the woods, went to do more burglaries that day, the next day. And they came back later around midnight to see what was going on. Now, keep in mind, family and other people, and not police at this time, were looking for her because she disappeared from McDaniels, okay? So they were out looking, and there was no sign of her. They even went back to Dublin to see if she was there, but she wasn't, okay? So the next night, about midnight, they brought the car back, loaded her up in the car, and basically hid out at a caravan park overnight, okay? And earlier when they were doing the burglaries, they saw a shed and some boats to take her out to the ocean and dump her body, the Irish Sea. And they found a lawnmower in one of the sheds, and they tied a lawnmower around her waist and dumped her into the Irish Sea. Yeah. Okay. Monday morning, again, this is over a period of a couple days. Monday morning, they made a burning, like a little fire, and they started to burn Elizabeth's clothing on the caravan park. And the police got a word of this, and they arrived, okay? And they asked who they were, and of course, they say, "We're John Murphey and Jeffrey Murphy," okay? The police didn't know anything about the disappearance of Elizabeth at this time, right? So they gave the address, and they actually took down the plate number of the car they were driving. Who connected who? Walsh, right? So he has this information, but has no knowledge of the disappearance of Elizabeth, okay? Which would later become useful, okay? So after that encounter where they escaped being caught, detected, they went back to Feathered, where Cliff Altram lived, where they were staying at Cliff Altram's in Feathered, okay? The search continued for days, and they finally reported her missing on Monday, almost 2 days after she disappeared from the pub. But they did find some items. They found her watch, which they identified. They found underclothing, which parents identified. And they found a pair of black shoes, which were one of the suspects' shoes. They weren't aware of who they belonged to yet. And remember the suitcases? Those little ties that you put on suitcases that have a little cardboard and you put your name on it? They found one of those fell off the suitcase and it had Jeffrey Murphy. So they did have some information. It was sloppy, even though it was planned and kind of organized. But that would prove useful later because that police officer, anybody know what they call police in Ireland? Garda. Yes, Garda, or the Gardaí for plural. That information would become useful after the officer found out that they were looking for individuals involving the disappearance. They would connect that. Okay? So they left for Feathered. They got to Feathered, and for the next 3 weeks, they would continue to commit burglaries, robberies. I'm not going to go into details about that, but on September 10th, Outram would drive them to Limerick. You guys probably heard of Limerick, Ireland. Okay. He drove Evans and Shaw to Limerick, where from there they thumbed a ride to Galway. It's a city in the west coast of Ireland, in the county Galway, and in Burna, which is a town next to County Galway, or in the county, they purchased a caravan for 380 pounds, something like that, to stay in and kind of their home base. Feathered was their home base. Now, Burna would be their home base. Okay? So they were planning for their next victims. And they actually stole a green Cortina, okay, a Ford Cortina, green in color. They would take the Cortina back to where they were staying and hand paint it with a brush, black. Okay? They stole a roof rack to put on top. They stole some tires to put new tires on the car. And they used a license plate that they stole previously and put it on there. Okay? In addition, what do you think they did? They didn't want to be caught because now there might be a word out that they were wanted and probably connected to this disappearance. They went to get temporary licenses, okay, under the name of Ball and Hall. And they were given temporary licenses, Roy Ball and David Hall. So they had actual licenses now of who they are now, aliases. Okay, so if they were pulled over, hey, we're not Jeffrey Evans and John Shaw. So they were thinking these things through. Okay. Castlebar, County Mayo, September 22nd, 1976. This is where Mary Duffy, outside of where she worked, was abducted and raped and killed. Okay. She got off of work about 11 p.m. She got into a telephone box, and called her brother Michael. Michael was busy for him to come pick her up, but he was busy. So she told the garage owner where he worked to tell him, I'm going to start walking that way home. And it was only like 6 miles away from Castlebar, her home. Belcaire, remember the one slide where she lived. Guess who was waiting and watching that whole time? Yeah, Evans and Shaw. So Evans would park the car, let Shaw out, and Mary would walk towards where she lived. Okay, start walking. As soon as they got close to the vehicle that Evans was in, Shaw would immediately start beating her, even knocked her dentures out that she had for dentistry work onto the ground and dragged her into the car. Okay. They proceeded to go on to the area called Connemara National Park, which is a big forest area. There's lots of lakes, very isolated, and they took her to a remote area where they tied her to a tree and repeatedly beat and raped and strangled her eventually with John Shaw strangled her with his hands. So, and then they would eventually dump her body in Lake Ina. Okay. And then they come back home. Okay. So they proceeded. This was over almost 2 days that the torture and rapes occurred. They repeatedly raped her, taking turns. So they went back to their caravan in Salt Hill in Burna area, and they were looking for their next victim on the 26th. They actually found somebody in a ocean, what they called a ocean wave motel or hotel. They actually met a victim and they were getting ready to abduct her. The police noticed the black Cortina that was wanted with the plates that another witness gave. They happened on it and they saw the car. Okay, so they waited for them to come out, and sure enough, they did. And they proceeded to stop them, arrest them without incident. Okay. Like I said before, they did try to abduct several women during this time period of a month, just were unsuccessful. And I imagine they were unsuccessful a lot because people are smarter than we give them credit for. Okay, so they were both arrested for possession of a stolen vehicle. Okay, they didn't have enough information yet to tie them to the murders, and then 2 days later, after the arrest, they finally confessed. Both of them confessed to the murders, the rapes and murders of both women. Okay. All right, so they took Shaw and Evans to the locations to help them find Mary and Elizabeth, and they did. They took them right to where they stole some implements to tie to their body in a mooring area where they tie boats to, and a boathouse. They took them to that area, and they had a lot of divers participate to locate her body. And then eventually, within a couple hours after that, they took them to British Bay, and they showed them where they dumped Elizabeth's body in the ocean. Of course, this is going to be a little more difficult to find, but she actually washed up on shore to the exact same day they confessed. Okay, she actually came to shore and was found in Southern Ireland. Okay. This is where Elizabeth was found on September 28th on the southern coast of Ireland, and October 10th, several days after, they found the body of Mary Duffy. Okay. Again, I want you to kind of remember, at the beginning I said we tend to forget about the victims and families. This is a short little clip of her brother John, not the brother she called, and Mella, the best friend, her boyfriend, as far as British Bay of Elizabeth. These are just a couple comments made current day as far as how they feel after so long, 30 years or so. Whoops. And this is where I got to do it manually.
You couldn't turn back the clock, but I know. That if I met John Shaw, I'd be the last man he'd ever meet. And that's for sure. I don't care what has happened after. Yeah, we would go to Mary's grave a couple of times a month, and just, keep it in good shape and clean it up and all that. And that's now she had a lot of friends passing down that road that she used to go to school with and work with and all that, and they pass by there now.
I'm so sorry, but it's too upsetting for me to talk about Liz. Even after 45 years, I still miss her and often think of how life was taken from her by two evil men. Liz was my best friend, full of life, a warm-hearted and lovely friend who had so much to give to this world. Her kind heart will be with me forever, I thank God for the lovely memories I do have and treasure them. Till we meet again, rest in peace, Liz. Yours faithfully, Mela Nesbitt.
All right. Are there any questions, comments? They both, actually, they were the longest serving prisoners in Ireland history, and they're both, one died in 2012 and one recently. Shaw just died recently in prison. So 45 years that they spent.
Where were they imprisoned? What prison?
Another prison, I'm trying to think, in Dublin. There's 4 prisons in Dublin area, but yeah, that's where one would die. Actually, Evans died in a nursing home, and then Shaw would die in prison. So, anything else? Yes.
Why did they confess?
They were just pressured, interrogations. We can go into that type. There's different techniques, and they used religion. One of, I believe Shaw was Catholic, and Ireland, the Republic of Ireland is mostly Catholic, so they used some of the religious aspects to get them to talk. And once one talked, they found out that one talked and the other talked. Again, they were trying to pit each other against each other, that type of thing. But eventually, they both confessed, and their stories corroborated. So, all right. Yes, Amanda. The accessories? Oh, no. They were unaware. Even though they knew they were in prison, they were unaware of what they were up to. They knew they were bad. Again, it's one of those, I don't tell on people, I don't rat. But they weren't accessories before or after, so they're just aware they're bad guys. So they didn't serve any time. All right, guys, thank you for coming. Appreciate it.